Alright, yeah, and welcome back to some more Magic Arena, and this week we're going to take a look at a brand new Golgari list. We're going to be playing around with Charnel Troll. So, Charnel Troll is one of the creatures that I think is a little bit underrated. It's kind of the way that I've built it anyway. If you remember Turn 2 Steel Leaf Champion, we'll get that up for you guys if you haven't seen it. Steel Leaf Champion is a 5/4 for 3 mana, and it's pretty good, you know. You'll have heard Turn 2 Steel Leaf being mentioned quite a lot. And in this Golgari list, we're going to be trying to go for Turn 2 Charnel Troll, which is a 4/4 on its face. However, every single upkeep we exile a creature out of our graveyard, and if we do, we put a counter on Charnel Troll, which means basically on the upkeep of the turn that it's going to attack on turn 2, it's actually going to be a 5/5 or even a 6/6, depending on how we get that creature into the graveyard. So Charnel Troll is actually a superb creature if it is left alone. This thing tramples through. If you can get it down really early, it's super hard to deal with. A lot of the removal in the format at the moment is like shocks, lightning strikes, and this one just gets all the way around that on turn 2. And basically you need hardcore removal, you know, your cast downs and your seal aways. So it is a little bit hard to deal with, but it's just as hard to deal with as a Steel Leaf Champion is anyway, and this card was superb back in the day, and I think it still is pretty good right now. So we're going to be building a deck around this card. So the downside of this card is that you have to exile a creature from your graveyard, and if you can't, you have to sacrifice it. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be filling up our graveyard with a heavy creature theme. We're actually running 29 creatures in this list, and only 8 of them are non-creatures. So how do we fill the graveyard? Well, we've got one of the best ways to fill the graveyard, Stitcher's Supplier, for a 1 mana 1/1. When it enters the battlefield or dies, you put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. So there is an element of RNG to this list. You know, we do have to hit creatures quite consistently with the Stitcher Suppliers and other graveyard filling things, but it's not too difficult with the heavy creature count. So if you are building this deck and you want to twist it around and make it into something else, be aware that the more creatures you add to this deck, the better it is. And if you add any more non-creatures, you're going to be hurting your deck somewhat. So keep that in mind when you look at all of the non-creatures that I'm actually featuring in this list. The more you actually add to the deck, the more you're going to decrease the odds of Stitcher's Supplier hitting well. But either way, what we want to be doing is hitting maybe about 2 on average with the Stitcher's Supplier. Even hitting 1 is just fine for the early game, so that's basically something we want to do. And if we can kill it, then all's good, because we will be just like suiciding this into our opponent. Really helps with the early game beatdown. In addition to the early game beatdown, we also have 3 copies of Pelt Collector. Now, I feel like 4 copies actually might be quite good here. The only reason I'm not running 4 copies is, as you can maybe tell, for an out of wildcards. This deck is not cheap. I think virtually everything in it is a rare. Yeah, we've got Pelt Collectors, we got Assassin's Trophies, Fine Finalities, Jade Light Rangers, Charnel Trolls, Underrealm Liches, and a Mythic, Izonis, and all of our lands. So it's a very expensive deck. It's taken me quite a while to actually build this one up, because I had an idea in mind, but budget restrictions have held it back for quite some time, but it just gives me more time to work on it, you know? Anyway, Pelt Collector is a 1 green, 1 mana 1/1. When another creature you control enters the battlefield or dies, if that creature's power is greater than Pelt Collector's, put a 1/1 counter on Pelt Collector, and as long as it has 3 or more counters on it, it has trample. So basically, this is most likely going to be a 1 mana 2/2 when it starts attacking, which, if you imagine a lot of 1 mana 2/2s, they are pretty much played in most formats that need early game creatures, you know. So superb value here, and if it dies, actually, it might even pump a fellow Pelt Collector. But in addition to that, we do have some creatures that would actually pump it when they die themselves. We have Merfolk Branchwalker, which is a 2 mana 2/1. However, when it enters the battlefield, it explores, which means you get to look at the top card, and if it is a non-land card, you put a counter on it. As I mentioned, there are very few cards in here that will, well, there's 23 cards in here that would actually force Branchwalker to not hit, but you know, she's not going to be doing that too often, hopefully, anyway. And if she becomes a 3-2, then when she dies, she'll actually pump the Pelt Collector up to a 3-3, so getting rid of one threat creates another. It's kind of cool that way. We have 3 copies of Llanowar Elves in here as well, as the way to get down the Charnel Troll. It's not an all-in strategy. I'm not going to run 4 copies of this, because we are trying to be an aggro deck after all. A little bit of a slower aggro deck compared to other things, so 3 copies just means that we're not going to be drawing 1 mana dorks every other turn, you know. We're going to be drawing them, hopefully one in our opener with a Charnel Troll, and make good use of that. In addition, we have Glowspore Shaman. It's kind of the Stitcher Supplier 2.0. Black and a green for a 3-1, so it's really good at attacking through on an empty board. And when it enters the battlefield, you get to put the top 3 cards of your library into your graveyard. You put a land card from your graveyard on top of your library if you want. So we could get back Memorial to Folly is one of our best lands that we can grab, because this allows us to get creature cards from our graveyard and put them in our hand. There's a fun little combo with Memorial, but I will get to that later down the line. But if we need to hit our land drops, then Glowspore Shaman is a good way to do that. If we've got a handful of creatures, which hopefully we do, then we don't really mind hitting lands off the top so that we can cast more creatures and get that beat down going strong. It's also a 3-powered creature as well, so if we go the Pelt Collector into the Branch Walker, we can then go Glowspore for 3 power, which would also pump up the Pelt Collector to a 3-3, so getting in all of those beats is wonderful. In addition to the Branch Walkers Explore, we do also have Jadelight Ranger. This is basically superb Jadelight Ranger. 1 and double green for a 2-1. When it enters the battlefield, it explores, and then it explores again. Again, I'm not sure if you want 3 or 4 copies of this card. Rarity restrictions have kind of held me back from putting 4 copies in and testing it, so it might be something that we want to try out. It is really good though, as it is quite often a 4-3 for 3 mana, so it's not going to get killed by a fair amount of stuff, and it hits like a train wreck, so it's pretty sweet in that sense as well. So, as far as the top-end creatures go, we do have a little bit of long game, and this is where our aggro deck kind of stops being aggressive and starts being a little bit more value-y. We have Underrealm Lich. Now, this card is a powerhouse, and the reason we're only running 1 copy is because we're actually going to be milling quite a lot of stuff, you know, with our Glowspore Shamans and our Stitcher Suppliers. We're going to be putting a lot of creatures into the graveyard, so if we hit Underrealm Lich and it goes into the graveyards, then we can use things like Find Finality, Memorial to Folly to pull it back. And why would we want to pull it back? Well, it's a 5-mana 4-3 that can pay life to be indestructible until the end of the turn, and then you tap it. So we can swing in with it for 4 damage, and it's just not going to die, so it needs exile removal or minus counters to get rid of this thing. But the main key for this card is the top part of the text here. It says, if you would draw a card, instead look at the top 3 cards of your library, put 1 into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. So what we can do is we can actually fill our graveyard with creatures and maybe even take the non-creatures. Like if we find Jadelight, Find, we're going to grab Find, because then we can find out all of the Jadelight Rangers, that kind of thing. Or we could just even use this to grab some later creatures, which is really superb stuff. And it also fuels up a lot of our other cards in our deck. Things like Izoni. Izoni has Undergrowth, which basically counts the number of creature cards in your graveyard. As I mentioned, we're running 29 creatures, so there really is a huge number associated with that Undergrowth count for the powerhouse that is Izoni. So 2 double black, double green. So she is kind of hard to cast. She is very late game, but she is basically in here for the late game potential. When she enters the battlefield, you get to create a 1/1 black and green insect creature token for each creature card in your graveyard. So if we are filling up our deck, which hopefully we are, then we get to completely swarm the board, and that might just be enough to get in those final bits of damage. If our opponent's going wide, then we can also go wide. That kind of idea. We can also use the sacrifice effect as well to draw cards and gain life, so that can get us out of an aggro strategy. If that is the case, you know, gaining the life is powerful. Drawing the card is also superb, and if we are drawing a card with Underrealm Lich, then Underrealm Lich actually triggers for that card draw. So Izoni would actually let us look at the top 3 cards if we had both of these out. It is a bit of a fringe case, but it has happened to me once before, and it is amazing when it happens. So something to keep in mind. But sacrificing other creatures is really good as well to keep the Charnel Troll around, because sometimes we might actually empty up our graveyard, so if we need Izoni as a sacrifice outlet, that is something to keep in mind. We can also sacrifice Stitcher's Supplier for extra value there, because it does benefit from dying. In addition as well, sacking a big creature for the Pelt Collector is a great way to pump that one up as well, if we have multiples on board. Now, the big thing that we'd want to sacrifice, if we were to sacrifice something huge, is Molder Hulk. Molder Hulk is a 9 mana, 7 black and a green 6/6 with the ability to pull a land from your graveyard to the battlefield. Now, there's a combo in this, but we'll get to that in a second. It also has Undergrowth, so we will be counting the creatures in our graveyard. It says it costs 1 less to cast for each creature card in your graveyard. Late game, this Molder Hulk is likely to just be a 2 mana 6/6, which is awesome. 2 mana 6/6 that then ramps you or grabs back a land. The land that we primarily want to get with Molder Hulk is Memorial to Folly. Memorial to Folly enters the battlefield tapped, but when it untaps, you can either pay the black mana to use it as essentially a swamp, or you can use the 3 mana to tap and sacrifice it to return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand. What this means for us is that if we have a Molder Hulk in play and it dies, we can then use the Memorial to Folly to pull back the Molder Hulk from our graveyard to cast it for probably 2 mana again. And then the Enter the Battlefield trigger allows us to grab a land, which means we can actually just grab the Memorial to Folly, making Molder Hulk an impossibly hard creature to get rid of. Now, of course, they can get around it with Exile, but if they're not using Exile and it's just damage-based or something like that, or they're trying to block with creatures, they're just never going to deal with this Molder Hulk, so we can just value them out very easily with the Memorial to Folly. And in the late game, we're going to have the mana to tap this, bring back the Molder Hulk and cast it. We're not going to have a problem there whatsoever. So the final card before I get to the rest of the lands, well, actually there's a few final cards. We've got Necrotic Wound. Necrotic Wound is a card that I've tried to find a home for a very long time, and this is the best place for a Necrotic Wound. God, this card is good. Look at Fatal Push Turbocharged. 1 black mana for an instant speed removal spell. It says target creature gets -X until the end of the turn, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. The best part about it is, if that creature would die this turn, exile it instead. So, you know the deck that's going around a lot, that Drake deck, with all of their phoenixes? Yeah, Necrotic Wound is an exile effect that is very easy to pull off very quickly. So Necrotic Wound can take down the Enigma Drakes, the Crackling Drakes, and the Phoenixes, and while it's doing that, all of that, it's exiling them. So if you're going after the Phoenixes, they're not coming back if your opponent manages to chain the spells together. It is just awesome. There's pretty much nothing in this format that could survive this Necrotic Wound. It gets around indestructibility, doesn't get around hexproof of course, so you are going to still have a little bit of an issue against things like Carnage Tyrant, but we should be powering out a Charnel Troll that's bigger than a Carnage Tyrant by then anyway, so really don't have to worry about that too much unless we were losing to begin with. So if we were losing to begin with, Charnel Troll isn't going to help us and Necrotic Wound wasn't going to help us. Something to keep in mind there. But yes, this Necrotic Wound, as we mentioned, could be up to giving a creature a -29, -29, so really awesome stuff there. And it's I'm just actually blown away by how good this Necrotic Wound has been. Sometimes it can whiff in the early game, you know, if you hit a Stitcher's Supplier and it hits 3 lands, then you're gonna have a bad time. But most of the time you should hit about 2 to 3 creatures on average by the time you want to use a Necrotic Wound, which puts it in range to kill most creatures that you want to deal with in the early game, and then we definitely have enough creatures in the late game for this to be awesome. We also have Assassin's Trophy as a bit of a catch-all. It allows us to destroy any kind of permanent, so planeswalkers, lands, creatures if we want it, enchantments, artifacts, kills everything, for just 1 black and 1 green mana. The downside is our opponent gets to search the library for a basic land, but we should be probably winning by then. We're going to be putting on a lot of pressure if the game is going well, so that extra land probably won't make much of a difference, but it's something to keep in mind all the same. So finally, we've got Find Finality. I'm sure many of you guys are aware of what this card does. Find is 2 black or 2 green or a combination of both. To return up to 2 creature cards from your graveyard to your hand. So if our opponent manages to kill our Charnel Troll somehow with like double strike, then we can bring it back with a find, and we can basically grab whatever creatures we want. Find is almost a tutor in a sense because of the amount of milling that we're going to be doing on ourselves with the Stitcher Suppliers, with the Glowspore Shamans. Find's pretty much going to get to the pick of the litter. We're going to be able to grab whatever we need at the time, so most of the time it'll probably be a Charnel Troll, but it could also be the Underrealm Lich, the Izoni, or the Mulder Hulk. Depending on the matchup, we have a nice little selection there. Finality is a 6-mana board wipe as well, so if things aren't going well for us on the other side, if our opponent is maybe going wide and we just can't get through them, Channel Troll, for a start, has Trample, so we shouldn't have too much of a problem there. However, if we need to use Finality, we can actually put 2 counters on a creature we control, and then all creatures get -4/-4 until the end of the turn. We're not too fussed about losing our own creatures, and most of the time, it's always going to be this case anyway. Channel Troll will actually survive the Finality, because we'll put the counters on Channel Troll, trample through anything that survives, and yeah, we'll just have a superb sized Channel Troll, and any of our creatures that die are basically fodder for his lovely little snacks down there for the exile. So that's essentially the deck, guys. I hope you enjoy it. The lands are Overgrown Tombs, as we know. Shock lands pay 2 life if you want to come into play untapped. Really, really important, I would say. If you don't have Overgrown Tombs, you probably shouldn't play this deck, because you need the turn 1 Llanowar Elves or the turn 1 Stitcher Supplier just to make sure the Channel Troll is good to go. So, something to keep in mind. 4 copies of Woodland Cemetery, enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a swamp or a forest. We got 8 forests, on 5 swamps, adding 2 extra Memorial to Follies in here. I used to have 3, but the tap lands were a little bit annoying, so something to keep in mind. The sideboard, we're going to be taking care of a few things here. We have the Finalities if we need to go for a grindy matchup, you know, the extra piece. We might also want the board wipe here, so it's useful. Yet again, if we have to take care of any Planeswalkers or anything that our main deck doesn't deal with, then we have the Assassin's Trophies to allow us to take care of any of that stuff. Wildgrowth Walker is really fun in burn matchups, and it's really good for grindy matchups as well. 2 mana 1/3 when a creature enters the, when a creature you control explores, you put a counter on it and then gain 3 life. So against burn, if they can't answer this really quickly, then our Jade Light Rangers and our Merfolk Branchwalkers are just going to explore this thing to crazy levels. It's going to be too high for our opponent to remove, and the life gain is just going to basically negate a burn spell. That's a lightning strike that we gain every time we explore, so it's pretty sweet. Crawl Harpooners as a 2 mana 3/2 with the Undergrowth, as we mentioned. Undergrowth, very powerful in this deck. It's kind of the mechanic focus of the deck, really. When it enters the battlefield, you get to choose a creature with flying you don't control, and it gets +X/+0 until the end of the turn, where X is the number of creature cards in your graveyard. Then you may have Crawl Harpooner fight that creature. So, what we can do with Crawl Harpooner is we can take down Enigma Drakes. All we need is 1 creature in the graveyard for Crawl Harpooner to take down anything. So, for some reason, if they manage to even get an Enigma Drake down on the battlefield in turn 2, we can actually Crawl Harpooner it and take it off of the field. We don't really care about it dying, because we can just find it back or something like that. With 3 copies of Shaper's Sanctuary, 1 green mana enchantment, so we get this down nice and early. When a creature you control becomes the target of a spell or an ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. So this is basically removal, negation. If our opponent Assassin's Trophies our Channel Troll, not only do we get to have a land, but we also get to draw a card. If they start removing it with their own Necrotic Wounds, we're going to draw a card. And the only thing this doesn't protect against is board wipes, so it's not too good in control decks where they're using Settle the Wreckages and Cleansing Novas, but if they have Sealaways, if they have Lightning Strikes, anything of that sort, we're going to be drawing a card, and it's going to be really hard for our opponent to keep up with the card advantage that this card affords us. It's pretty sweet. Finally, we got 3 copies of Duress for those control matchups. If we just cannot get anything to resolve because they're mono removal, then Duress is the way to go about it. 1 black mana for a sorcery speed card. Target opponent reveals their hand. You may choose a non-creature, non-land card for it, and they discard that card. So either removal, board wipes, or planeswalkers. That's basically what we want to be hitting with Duress. So that's essentially the deck. I hope you enjoy the look of it, and if you do, then be sure to stick around to the end of the video. There'll be a link to the matches for you guys to watch. Also, down in the description below is a link to the deck list and the matches there as well. We do have a public Discord as well. Just on an off note, if you do want to join the public Discord, there is a link down below as well. Hopefully that link works anyway. I think there might be a little bit of an issue with that, but let me know if you do have any troubles and I will send you another link. It'd be nice to see you all in the public Discord anyway. So without further ado, I'm going to leave it off here. I've been talking way too long. I hope you enjoy the matches, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.